Hello, welcome to episode 5 of the video series, Finding the Right Advisor for You and Your Wealth. Once again, I'm Todd Goldman, and in this episode, we'll be covering the third step in the advisor selection process, sorting the priorities for the firm. Now, this step piggybacks on the previous video, which dealt with prioritizing the qualities of the human advisor that's most suited to your needs. However, this time around, we'll be learning about the relevant capabilities of the company or firm where your advisor works. Now, getting back to the analogy I used in episode 1, the company where your advisor works is like the house where you are forced to live because your romantic partner lives there too. Before you commit to the relationship, you want to make sure the house meets your practical needs at least as much as the person meets your emotional needs. Now, much like the range of options that are available in a human advisor, most people aren't aware of all of the options available in the financial service companies. So that's what we're looking to fix with this discussion. With that said, let's jump right to a list of capabilities and features for you to prioritize. So as you can see here, we have a list of 16 different features that you can basically screen for when you are identifying the firm or company that is perhaps the best fit for you and your situation. Now, what I've done here is I've highlighted some of them in red and some of them in blue. And the distinction there is that some of these features are going to point you in a particular direction, perhaps closer to the type of firm. And then the blue will point you towards specific companies within that firm category. So again, it depends on what you find is most important to you, but it may help simplify your search if you know what type of firm that you should be working with. Once we've walked through all 16 items and I've given you a little bit more background, hopefully it'll give you some clarity. And then I recommend you sit down and basically do the same exercise, the prioritization methodology that we used in the previous video lesson, the one we did for the individual advisors and their qualities and characteristics. You can use the same method here with this list of 16. Once again, you can either just copy these 16 items onto separate 3x5 note cards, or I've got a PDF on the website. You can download it and then cut it up and use it the same way, using the tick marks to evaluate which ones are the highest priority. Once you have that, you can wrap that together with the information that we procured in the last video exercise, and then you'll have a very specific ask that you will put forth when you start asking for those referrals from your business and personal network. So that's pretty much it for the methodology. I think really the substance of the entire discussion today is going to be the nitty-gritty with regards to each one of these items. So why don't we jump right in on that? All right. So we'll start with the first one, which is pretty straightforward and very easy to understand. Low cost. If this is a high priority for you, you're just fee adverse, you'd just rather not spend, you'd like to spend as little as possible on fees, nothing wrong with that. Just keep in mind there's a few things which are perhaps, again, fairly obvious, but just worth mentioning. Lower costs typically mean you're getting less service, and which oftentimes in this day and age translates into less human attention. You can oftentimes get the job done if you don't have to have a dedicated advisor. Using a robo-advisor, the algorithms do everything. The software will do a lot. And periodically, you'll have an 800 number that you can call on. You can call into to hopefully speak with someone to help with any details that remain. But you're not going to have someone that's focused just on you and knows your situation specifically. It is possible that you give up some quality when you go with the lower cost, but we all define quality a little bit differently, but just something to keep in mind. The one secret that you might be able to exploit, particularly in this day and age now that everyone is working remotely more often and feels very comfortable working with folks over Zoom as opposed to in person, is if you are in a more expensive market, an urban center, perhaps on the coast, or like Dallas or any of those other central city areas, you can always shop out of your market. You can go work with an advisor in Omaha or Montana or Georgia or Florida, any place where the cost of living is less. It's quite possible that their fees may be less as well. No guarantee, but that is an option that you can explore these days. Now, just to give you a sense, this is one of the red items. So to give you a sense of if low cost is your highest priority, you may want to focus on some of the firm types that are listed here on the left. Again, I'm going to use this graduated scale throughout the presentation and throughout the video for the different qualities and features that point or lend themselves towards one type of firm versus the other. So in this case, of course, the lowest cost options are going to be your discount brokers and your robo-advisors, followed by your fee-only planners. Most of the full-service firms are kind of priced in the same area towards the middle, with your investment banks, the multifamily offices, and the business managers having the greatest cost. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that's largely due to the fact that they provide the most service. But anyways, that'll just kind of give you a little bit of a guidance here. If low cost is a high priority for you, aim to the left. Convenience. Now, some of us define convenience one way and others do it another way. But if this is a priority for you, is physical convenience important? Do you want to easily stop by their physical office, or do they even have one? How far away is it from your house? Do you like the interpersonal contact that comes from someone being in physical proximity, or at least working within and living within the same town as you? Do you like to socialize with the advisors? That's another component. So if that's a priority for you, just make that, be aware of that. Or some folks just prefer digital convenience. And again, this is largely as a result of the past 15 years of evolution of service in the space. The technology is much more robust than it was a short while ago. So many companies can have a very robust client platform that you can interface with directly. Could be web, app, phone related, the full gamut. If they are, one thing to keep in mind, this of course, you don't have to work with someone in state with you. But if you are working with an advisor or an advisory firm that's out of state, depending on how they're regulated and how they're set up, you just want to make sure that they are authorized to take clients in the state in which you live. And then the other question is do you want to see them in person occasionally? So if that's the case, do they travel to your region, or do you travel to their region periodically for vacation? If so, that might meet your need. So just something to keep in mind. And again, this is going to point you towards a particular company within a firm type, but not necessarily towards one type of firm versus another. Access to senior management or owners. So this is important if you want to know the face of the company. And that is, of course, usually the advantage there is you might get treated better. Or if there's a problem arises, you have access to the person with ultimate power to resolve the issue. So something just to keep in mind. Also, depending on how you want to view your relationship with the firm, do you want to be a partner of the firm, partner client of the firm, or do you want to be just a customer of the firm, or a client in the most broad sense? So obviously, the smaller the company, the easier it is to know the management and to be considered a partner with the owners. And again, this is also builds towards, to the extent that you're able to build social bonds with the owners of the company or senior management, that, of course, is going to help you build trust with them and what they're doing for you, and then the rapport issue as well. Now, because this is really driven by the size of the firm, this one is going to direct you towards one type of firm versus another. You're going to have the least access to senior management with discount brokers and robo-advisors. Again, those are almost faceless organizations. Commercial and retail banks, insurance companies, and investment banks, you're moving a little bit closer to getting to senior management, depending on the size of the organization. Full service brokerage firms, asset management firms, and trust companies are usually a little more accessible just due to their size. And as I'd mentioned, the full service brokers tend to operate as almost like independent companies using just the umbrella of that larger entity. So it is possible to meet the senior managers of that entity relatively easily, at least the regional managers. On the far end of the right, again, if this is a highest priority for you, then you'll want to focus on the 4 on the right. So your registered investment advisors, those are the independent companies. Multifamily offices and business management firms, they tend to be smaller organizations, very easy to know who owns the firm and who's running the firm. Fee-only planners, again, as I mentioned before, they tend to be standalone entities or maybe a small collection of planners. Again, very super easy to know who's in charge. Comp structure that limits conflicts of interest. All right, so I touched on this a little bit in the previous video about the industry itself and how you are paying fees and how the advisors receive compensation. So this is part of the conversation that you'll have when talking to a specific company to understand how the advisors are paid. So just some ideas, sometimes they're paid or you're paying a wrap fee, or that 1% of your assets or something in that range per year. Other times advisors are getting compensated based on almost a la carte style of services or products that you're being put into your account. Sometimes they just make sales commissions or flat fees. You may have some strong opinions about which business model you think is going to result in having your best interests taken seriously. If that's the case, use that as part of your screening tool. And again, really the goal here is how is that person's advice as well as their behavior going to be influenced by the compensation that he or she is receiving. And then as a result, would this impact the amount of trust that you have in their advice and the guidance that they're providing? So again, just something to keep in mind. Depth of advice. This is a very broad category. Basically, the more complex your financial situation is, the more resources you want the advisor to have. And typically, those resources extend beyond just the knowledge of that individual. You want to know how deep is the bench at the firm that advisor is working at. If you need guidance on estate documents or insurance or tax planning, any of these things which are not, maybe you're combining them with the portfolio side of things. You just want to know that the advisor has multiple resources upon which to draw. Brand name. So this would be, have you ever heard of this company before? The benefits of going with a brand is, generally you kind of know what you're going to get for the most part. There's usually a long history associated with that company. And if it's a significant brand, hopefully there's some financial stability, which will indicates, past success, and ideally significant infrastructure, which is there to support the services that the advisor, the human advisor, is providing you, as well as to provide additional depth of resources or any of these other items. So if that's important to you and you think you can get that infrastructure through a brand, then you'd want to focus on, this may point you again towards a type of firm. On the left are the company types that generally have very little brand awareness. You may notice that these are, for the most part, the companies that you had the most access to senior management, right? It's kind of the flip side of the coin. So if both of these items are your highest priorities, you're going to have to make some decisions as to which one's the most important. But generally speaking, fee-only planners, multifamily offices, business managers, registered investment advisors, for the most part, you've probably not heard of. If you have heard of them, it's probably because they have a local brand awareness. but that's probably about the extent of it. When you get into the regional brand awareness, you've got your asset management firms and your trust companies. And that's not because they are restricted to a particular region, but often, sometimes they do. Sometimes an asset management company will only have an office in a particular region, or maybe they're growing an office in your market and you just haven't heard of them before. Similarly with trust companies. But they're national firms. They just aren't necessarily big enough to have offices everywhere. The ones that do have offices everywhere are the ones that they're going to come front of mind. Your big investment banks, full service brokers, insurance companies, discount brokers, commercial, retail banks, and robo-advisors. These are the brands that are in the news a lot. You see their names on the buildings as you drive down the street, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of options if you are looking for a brand that people have heard of. All right, so 24/7 access to your team. So if you lead a life that you really would benefit from having access to the folks that are helping with your wealth, your money, your investments, whatever it might be, if that's important to you due to your lifestyle, then you'd want to seek this out. It's typically most common if you're doing a lot of international travel or overseas work. It might be important. You're in different time zones. You just want to be able to reach your people no matter what time of day. If you have or anticipate a lot of emergencies, and if they're frequent, then you'd want to have people on call. And again, typically if you are in the market for the concierge services, again, that typically comes from the multifamily office and business management firms. That would be a situation where you just want to have someone that you can call to, if you lose your credit card while traveling in London at an off hour, you want to be able to reach somebody and get it resolved. Just one thing to keep in mind, if you are working with a firm that provides this, you just want to make sure that they are conscious of the work-life balance and burnout issue. If the firm is large enough, that's usually not an issue. They've got enough manpower. But if it's a 1 or 2 person firm, then that could be problematic because you'll have to find a good advisor, but they're not going to stick around for a long time because they may burn out. It's also possible it may increase the cost. But again, if it's important to you, it should be a priority. All right, so the fiduciary relationship criteria. So this is a big one, and if you've never heard of this, it's going to take a minute to explain it, but it's important. So within the industry, there are 2 standards that are used to help regulate behavior of the advisors. There's what's called the suitability standard, and there's the fiduciary standard. And the difference being that if an advisor is held to the suitability standard, all they need to do is when they're making a recommendation to you is say, yes, this type of solution or product is appropriate for a person like you, someone who makes about as much money as you do, has as much wealth as you do, etc. The fiduciary standard says that the advisor can only recommend or should only be making recommendations of solutions or products if they know or feel to the best of their knowledge that this is right for you specifically, knowing your situation. Not necessarily dependent upon how much wealth you have or how much money you make. If they know more details about your situation, they should be able to be basically making the determination, is this a good solution for you? It seems like splitting hairs a little bit, but it does have some rather key distinctions. We can talk about more of this later if there's a lot of questions about it, but you can also just read up on it a little bit online if you need to. But it is an important distinction, and you'll want to know, okay, is the firm I'm working with one that is held to the fiduciary standard or one that's held to the suitability standard? Okay. And a big driver of that is really your own financial literacy. The more you know about something, then the easier it is to work within just the suitability standard. Someone can make a recommendation to you for a solution or product, and you could say, well, I know about that. Yeah, that's not the right fit for me. If you're working with someone who's held to the fiduciary standard, they make that call. They should be making that call on your behalf. So with that said, fee-only planners and business managers, it doesn't really apply to them because they're not really implementing any specific investment type solutions. The suitability standard is the one that's used most, pretty exclusively to brokerage type business models. So that's going to be your full service brokers, discount brokers, commercial and retail banks generally are structured as brokerages. Robo-advisors and insurance companies, for the most part, are going to fall under the suitability standard. Some asset management firms and some investment banks and some multifamily offices may be set up or structured to operate under the fiduciary standard. But definitively, all RIAs, registered investment advisors, and all trust companies, by definition, have to adhere to the fiduciary standard. So just something to keep in mind when you're talking to a company. You can ask, how they're structured and do they follow, or are they held to the fiduciary standard? Highest possible returns. If this is a priority for you, we want to just kind of think about what that means and how it would be impacted, or what else it impacts. So typically, the highest possible returns is driven by the investment approach that is being used by the company. It usually entails, concentrated positions, active management. They might have some proprietary technology that allows them to outperform. They might be using options or leverage in an investment strategy. Or they just have access to hedge funds, limited partnerships, private deals, anything along those lines. Now, regardless of what the technical components of the highest possible return looks like, you always want to figure out what are you giving up to achieve those highest possible returns. Is it truly their ability, that firm's ability to do better, build a better mousetrap than someone else? Or are they just basically getting higher returns while also taking higher risk? So in a perfect world, you could evaluate every option on a risk-adjusted basis for taking the same amount of risk, no matter what it is. Am I getting a better return or the same or lower? But either way, just something to keep in mind. A lot of these solutions that are listed here do require you to be a qualified investor or a qualified purchaser, or an accredited investor. Those are different terminologies to describe basically your level of wealth and your level of investment sophistication. There's some talk of, at this time of recording, there's some discussion about changing those requirements, but at present, it's basically just how much money do you have and or how much money do you make per year that lets you fall into these categories that would then let you participate in some of these strategies. So it's kind of complicated, kind of a pain in the butt, but that is currently how it's structured. So again, there's nothing wrong with wanting the highest possible returns. It makes perfect sense. But if that is your highest priority, it's possibly going to drive you in a particular direction. And if nothing else, you're going to want to do more due diligence when you start interviewing companies. Open architecture. So this is a term that's used to describe essentially what investments the advisor has access to purchase or put into your account. Again, this is, of course, focusing on the implementation or the portfolio construction side of things. Some companies restrict their advisors or strongly encourage them to use brand named investments. So you're at the XYZ company and they have the XYZ mutual fund family that is used for investing in stocks, large stocks, mid-cap stocks, small-cap stocks, bonds, whatever it might be. It's possible that your advisor does not have access to other types of investments. So if you want the advisor to have the full toolbox at his or her disposal, then you may want to seek out a company that specifically has an open architecture. It's not as big of a deal as it used to be because there used to be a lot more proprietary business models out there, but they do still exist, so just be aware of that. And the main reason that this is an issue is possibly because there's a conflict of interest, right? here's someone giving you advice, hey, you should own this investment. Oh, by the way, probably not going to tell you this, they're getting, or the company at least, is making additional revenue off of you due to built-in fees within that fund family. Also, is that necessarily the best fund or investment for what you need and what you're looking for? There might be something else that's out there, but it's, again, if they're a closed architecture, that advisor may not have access to it. Soft dollars, that's just how sometimes advisors get paid, like money in the kind of like extra money if they're in the funds that's owned by their company that they work for. Okay, attractive pricing on loans. This is, of course, an issue that is most impacts business owners and persons with multiple pieces of real estate or complicated banking situations. Not at all uncommon. You're going to want to work with a firm that has access to lending. If they're, again, if your focus is on the investment side, you also want to have the lending attached. Or if you're going to a company that service provider that has the lending, they may then offer the investments as a sidecar or as a component of what they're providing for you. This may be a big driver of what type of firm that you want to work with. So here, looking at the spectrum of loan availability, starting at the right-hand side, we can see, no surprise, the firm types that have the easiest and most robust lending are, of course, the commercial and retail banks and the investment banks, followed a little bit just behind by the full-service brokers. Those brokerage houses typically have lending capabilities attached to their larger infrastructure. Following that, moving to the left, we've got the registered investment advisors who oftentimes have the resources of the custodians that they work with, as well as then the discount brokers, insurance companies. They may have some lending capabilities. The ones that have none, of course, are going to be your robo-advisors, the trust companies, asset management firms, possibly. I could be wrong about those, so I reserve the right to be corrected later. They tend not to have lending there. Trust companies as well, but they might have some. The fee-only planners, business managers, and multifamily offices, they have generally no in-house lending. They're just small companies. All right, stable ownership or management. So this is basically, you have to ask yourself, what's your comfort level with changes within a company? It's possible there's going to be a mergers or an acquisition within a large firm. Your support staff might leave. The advisor might leave. If it's a smaller firm, it's possible that the owners may retire. And then you want to know, is there a succession plan in place? And also, it's sometimes worth asking, does your advisor have equity in the firm? Either if it's a large firm, or they have stock in it. If it's a small firm, are they a partner or owner of some sort? And all of those are going to kind of factor into the calculus as to what's the likelihood of a possible change in the situation, either, as I described before, a divorce or a move with regards to the relationship between your advisor, the firm they work for, and you. So again, just some questions to keep in mind, and if stability is important to you, then make sure that that's a part of your screening process. Low advisor to client ratio, or maybe it's low client to advisor ratio. Probably a better way to think of it. You just want to make sure that does your advisor have so many clients that they don't have the attention capacity to help you and deal with your accounts on a regular basis. It is possible that if you're paying higher fees, you're going to get more attention. And then the other thing to keep in mind is, is the company growing? And if so, what's the growth potential or the projections look like, and how will that impact the number of advisors or number of clients that each advisor has? I think I mentioned before, you can kind of gauge, do you want to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? That's part of this calculus. Access to IPOs, initial public offerings. So it's a very specific type of investing, an opportunity to create wealth. It's typically available only at the full service brokerage firms and investment banks, because when a company goes public for the first time, those shares are kind of funneled through the larger institutions in the industry. So typically you have to be a client of those firms in order to have the access to buy them for the initial public offering. That's not to say you can't buy those shares after the fact, but the day that they're issued, you typically have to work or be working with an advisor at one of those larger firms. If this is something you want to focus on as part of your strategy, then that would shift you towards particular types of companies, usually the larger ones, investment banks and so forth. Access to private investments. So private investments are non-publicly traded investment opportunities. They are, generally speaking, much less liquid, meaning if you're making a private investment, you can't just sell it the next day and get all your cash back. Stocks, bonds, most mutual funds, they are daily liquid. So, you buy them today, change your mind, sell them tomorrow, not an issue. Private investments, the structure is such that you're tying up the money for a period of months or years, typically years. You pretty much always have to be a accredited investor or a qualified purchaser in order to have access to them. And it does include limited partnerships, real estate, hedge funds, private equity, venture capital, natural resources, things of that nature are the types of things that you can buy with these types of funds. Generally speaking, the companies that have the most access or really kind of focus on this space are typically the ones that focus and work with larger clients, folks with more sophisticated, complicated financial situations. So again, working from the right to the left, if this is a high priority for you because you kind of fall into this bucket and you want the additional benefits of this type of investing, which is typically higher returns, lower risk, generally speaking, you're working with a multifamily office, investment banks. Again, these are the ones that are working with the wealthy of the wealthy. Next step down would be some full service brokers have access to this type of investment. Some trust companies, larger registered investment advisory firms have access to this. The company I work for specializes in this type of investment, and we're a larger registered investment advisory firm. And business managers, while they don't necessarily manage them themselves, the nature of what they're doing is they're helping direct their clients to partners or firms that are doing these private investments. Commercial and retail banks, asset management firms, it's not very often that you'll encounter that, but sometimes it's out there. And then the ones on the far left, the robo-advisors, the small RIAs, discount brokers, fee-only planners, and insurance companies, they generally don't have any access to this type of investing, generally speaking. Access to ethical investing. So this is oftentimes referred to as socially responsible investing, also ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. Those are the two common terms used. This is not necessarily a function of the type of firm that you would be talking to, but more the company itself, whether this is a focus, part of their solution is targeted towards the socially responsible style of investing. That is something, again, that you should just keep in mind. And you can make that part of your ask when you're looking for those referrals or searching the internet if you want a company that does focus on this. Again, my company has an entire investment solution across all asset categories that is geared towards this sort of thing. All right, that's it. That's the entire 16-part list. It probably felt like 16 to you listening to me talk, but hopefully that was helpful and you got some new information out of it. Now, again, once you have gone through the list on your own and done the prioritization methodology, you should have, again, your top 3 or 4 issues or features that you're looking for. And hopefully some of them are pointing you towards a particular type of firm. And then you can use that information when you combine it with what we developed in the previous chapter, the qualities of the person. So now your ask, when you're going out for asking for referrals or you're doing your search should perhaps look a little bit more robust. It should look like you're looking for someone who is under 50 years old, has experience with C-suite executives, can help me with my philanthropic planning, and works at a large RIA or trust company. Okay, so obviously that person was most interested in working with someone that had a fiduciary relationship. Okay. Or you could ask, you're looking for someone who's a woman with great verbal communication skills, understands special needs trusts, and has her own team at a brokerage firm. Okay, so there's a couple of factors that pointed her towards the brokerage firm, and you wanted her to be basically senior management or kind of the person in charge. Last example, looking for someone who has at least 15 years in the business, a CFP background, understands my Mormon faith and values, and works at a commercial bank or an investment bank, probably because you need lending, right? That may be your highest priority. So again, these are just examples of how you use the information that I've been discussing in this video to point you in a little bit more accurate direction when you start conducting your search. All right, that's it. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this information helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. Let your friends know that this information is out there. Anyone that's looking for this content, please point them in my direction. For more information, additional content, and copies of this presentation, please visit www.right-advisor.com. If you need help with your search or have any specific questions that I didn't cover in this video, please feel free to email me at todd@right-advisor.com. The next video in the series will cover steps 4 and 5 in the advisor selection process, which is going to cover who and how to ask for introductions and referrals. So I do promise that'll be a shorter video than this one, and I hope you'll tune in for that as well. But in the meantime, farewell, good fortune, see you soon.